They called me senile, so I donated the house and watched them lose everything. They whispered that I was senile, so I quietly donated the house to someone who deserved it. Then, I may have forgotten where I left my glasses, but I never forgot who I raised. My name is Helen Marston, and I'm 72 years old. I've lived in the same modest 2-story home in Hartford, Connecticut for over 40 years. It's not much by today's standards. White siding, squeaky porch swing, a cracked driveway, but every corner of that house holds pieces of my life. My late husband, Thomas, built the pantry shelves with his own hands. My children took their first steps on that kitchen floor. And every birthday, every holiday, every scraped knee, they happened within those walls. But lately, the people I once swaddled in my arms speak about me like I'm furniture, something old that's taking up space. It started subtly. "Mom, are you sure you're taking your medication right?" My daughter Lynn, the pediatric nurse, would ask in that honeyed tone nurses use with patients who don't understand they're dying. Then came my son Eric, who started visiting not to talk, but to quietly check my mail and look through my bills. And then, the whispering. I heard Lynn one day in the hallway, talking to Eric on the phone while she thought I was napping. She forgot the name of her neighbor. Again. "I don't know, Eric. It's like she's slipping. Honestly, she's not all there anymore." I stood behind the half-open bedroom door, my hand trembling on the knob, not because I was scared, but because it was the first time I felt like a ghost in my own home. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, the overhead light flickering like it always did when the wind blew too hard. My cup of chamomile tea had gone cold. I hadn't spoken a word in over an hour, not even to the dog. They thought I was senile, that I didn't hear, that I didn't know. They were wrong. See, when you're old, people think you're fragile. Like your bones, your brain must be brittle. They mistake gentleness for weakness, silence for confusion. But silence can be a choice. I chose not to argue with them. I chose not to scream, "I raised you better than this." Instead, I started listening harder, observing more, and planning, quietly, carefully. One day, Lynn asked if she could take over managing the house. She said it like a question, but the tone in her voice made it sound more like a formality, like it had already been decided, and I was just a step in the paperwork. "You know, just to help you, Mom. You don't need to worry about repairs, taxes, all that confusing stuff." I smiled. "That's thoughtful, honey." Eric followed soon after. "Maybe we could bring in a part-time caregiver just to help out around the house. We can even use the spare bedroom for them. Eventually, you might prefer a retirement home, right? One with activities, friends your age. It's not safe for you to be here alone." It wasn't concern. It was calculation. But what neither of them knew was that I had already started making my own plans, not for a caregiver, not for a retirement home, but for the future of this house and who would receive it when I was gone. I wasn't ready to die, and I wasn't about to be moved out like a broken chair. That night, as I pulled a thick folder from the back of my closet labeled "Private Helen's Stuff," I placed it gently on the bed. Inside were documents, my living trust, property, deed, power of attorney, and most importantly, a list of people who had shown me kindness without ever expecting anything in return. And at the very top of that list, Mariah, a young woman I had met 3 winters ago right outside the grocery store. She just moved to Hartford with her daughter after escaping an abusive relationship. She used to shovel my snow without asking. She baked me bread when my knees went out, never once asked for money, just smiled and said, "We look out for each other here, don't we?" Yes, we do. And I was about to prove it. It's funny what people notice and what they miss. My kids noticed when I forgot the name of my doctor. They noticed when I mixed up salt and sugar in a cookie recipe. but they didn't notice when I started closing bank accounts, or when I had the locks changed and didn't give them the new keys. They noticed a trembling hand holding a teacup, but not the sharpness in my eyes as I watched them, studying their patterns like a woman planning an escape from a house she no longer recognized. The truth is, I had already let go of both of them emotionally long before I ever signed a single paper. There was no malice in my heart, just a heavy, aching kind of grief, not the kind you wail about, the kind that settles in your chest like a weight and doesn't leave. It had been a slow betrayal. Lynn, with her clipboard mind and concerned glances, had once slept curled up beside me during thunderstorms. Eric used to draw pictures for me with stick figure families, always with Mommy drawn with a red heart on her shirt. Where had those children gone? Now they visited out of obligation, not love. Lynn often spent the entire time texting. Eric would check the thermostat like he was the landlord. But Mariah? She showed up differently. She didn't call ahead. She just knocked, sometimes with muffins, sometimes with soup, always with that soft, knowing smile. She never pitied me. She respected me. And more than that, she reminded me what love without entitlement looked like. Her daughter, Annie, would draw pictures too, except hers still included me, wrinkled face and all. She once handed me a crayon drawing with the words, Grandma, Helen, written in big purple letters above my head. I hadn't cried that hard in years. One Thursday afternoon, while Eric was checking in, he saw the drawing on my fridge. "What's this?" he asked flatly. "A gift," I replied, smiling. "From who?" "Someone who still sees me." He didn't respond. He just frowned, muttered something about the faucet leaking in the upstairs bathroom, and went to investigate. That's what they had turned into: inspectors, assessors, not children, not family. That night, I called my lawyer. His name was Frank Dorsey, and he'd helped Thomas and me with our will years ago. When I told him what I wanted to do, legally transfer ownership of my house to Mariah and her daughter, he didn't laugh. He didn't question my mental state like my children surely would have. He listened. He even said, "Helen, this is probably the clearest I've ever heard you." The process took a few weeks. I had to answer questions, verify paperwork, go through the proper legal channels. I told no one, not even Mariah, not yet. Meanwhile, Lynn grew more aggressive. She brought over pamphlets for assisted living facilities, colorful brochures with fake smiling seniors playing checkers under artificial lights. "Mom, these places are amazing. They have yoga and shuttle services and, get this, a salon, right? On site. Don't you think you'd be happier surrounded by people your age?" "I'm happy here," I said softly, "with my life and my memories." "But Mom, you barely leave the house." "I have everything I need." She didn't hear me, or maybe she didn't want to. I realized then that she and Eric had already erased me. In their minds, I was just a problem to solve, a task to manage. They were waiting for me to become a burden they could justify removing. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I started preparing for a different kind of departure. Not death, but freedom. I baked more often. I made jam again, my late husband's favorite kind, strawberry vanilla. I gave it to the mailman, to the woman at the library desk, to the neighbors who still waved. I held on to those final weeks like sacred pages in a book I didn't want to close. And the day the papers came through, signed, sealed, legally binding, I sat on the porch and watched the wind dance through the trees. A peace I hadn't felt in years washed over me. The house was no longer mine, but it was finally going to someone who truly valued it. And now, all that was left was to tell them. I didn't plan it like some dramatic movie moment. There wasn't a big party or a family gathering, no cake, no sentimental slideshow of memories projected on a wall. Just a Saturday afternoon. Lynn had come by with Eric. Unannounced as usual, they were always most cooperative when they thought they were coordinating something behind my back. She had that "we need to talk" look on her face, and he brought a notebook, of all things, like he was ready to take inventory of my soul. I was waiting in the living room, dressed neatly, my hair curled the way Thomas used to like. The sun poured in through the window, lighting up the dust, motes like tiny, floating truths. "Mom," Lynn started, sitting down stiffly. "Eric and I have been talking, and we think it's time we move forward on the care plan. You need supervision now." Eric nodded like a bobblehead. "We've already looked at 3 retirement homes. One of them has a walking trail and—" I held up my hand. "You don't need to say more," I said calmly. "You're right about one thing. It is time to move forward." They both blinked, surprised at how easy that seemed. "Thank you," Lynn said with a sigh of relief. "We thought you might resist." I smiled. "Oh, I already moved forward." They both tilted their heads. "What does that mean?" Eric asked. "I no longer own this house," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "It's not mine anymore." A beat of silence. "I don't understand," Lynn said slowly. "What do you mean, not yours?" "I signed it over," I said, my voice even and unflinching. "It now belongs to someone who's shown me more kindness in 3 years than either of you have in the last 10. The room turned to ice. "You... what?" Eric choked. "You can't just—" "I can," I said calmly. "And I did. It's legal. It's done. And you'll be receiving no inheritance from it." Lynn stood up, her voice raising in that brittle, high-pitched tone she always used when she lost control. "You're not well, Mom. This is a sign of mental decline. You can't just give away your house." I looked her square in the eye. "You called me senile behind my back. You made plans to relocate me. You looked through my drawers without asking. You treated me like a burden, a fading picture in your photo album." Eric stammered. "That's not— Mom, come on, we're your children." "And children who forget the hands that fed them don't deserve the roof those hands built," I said, rising slowly to my feet. "This house will go to Mariah and Annie. They need it. And more importantly, they deserve it." Lynn's face went pale. "You gave it to that girl from down the street? You barely know her." "I know enough," I said. "She never once asked for anything. She just helped, loved, and respected me." Eric's fists clenched. "You've been manipulated." "No," I said, softer this time. "I've been loved. And I remember what that feels like, even if you two have forgotten." They stood there, stunned. For once, no one had a chart, a brochure, or a plan. They were simply powerless. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strong, independent, free. They left in silence. No hugs, no guilt-ridden apologies, just footsteps down the porch and the distant slamming of a car door. I sat back down in my favorite chair and let the silence wrap around me. Not lonely, not bitter, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm you no longer need to weather. 3 days passed after Lynn and Eric stormed out of my home, and I didn't hear a word from them. No texts, no calls, not even a passive-aggressive email, which Lynn usually preferred when she wanted to say something cruel while pretending it was kind. But I wasn't waiting. I'd waited for their approval for too long. Now it was time to move forward, with the one thing I had left to give, a legacy of love, not resentment. That morning, I called Mariah. "Could you stop by this afternoon?" I asked her. "Of course," she said, without hesitation. "Is everything all right?" I smiled to myself. She always asked that, genuinely asked it, not as a greeting, but as a human being who cared. She didn't know what was coming, and that made it all the more special. She arrived around 3, with Annie trailing beside her, clutching a little purple sketch pad. They both had paint on their hands. "We were finishing a project," Mariah said with a sheepish grin. "Annie insisted on painting birds today." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Come in, I made tea." We sat at the small round table where I'd once cut birthday cakes and signed permission slips. And for a moment, it felt like old times, the kind that warm your bones. Mariah sipped her tea and tilted her head. "You seem different today. Lighter, maybe." "I am," I said. Then I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was the deed to the house, and a single silver key. Her brow furrowed as she opened it, and I watched her face shift from confusion to disbelief to something I'll never forget. Stunned, breathless gratitude. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's yours," I said. "This house, it's yours now, Mariah, yours and Annie's." She looked up, her hands trembling. "Helen, no. I can't. I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do," I said firmly. "You didn't ask for it. That's why you deserve it. You treated me like a person when my own children treated me like a relic. You shoveled. My snow brought me soup, fixed the hinge on the back gate without ever saying a word about it." She was crying now. "But this is too much." "It's not," I said softly. "It's not nearly enough for what you gave me. You reminded me I still mattered, that I wasn't just a shadow fading out of the picture." Annie crawled onto her mother's lap and reached for the key, her tiny fingers wrapping around it like it was something magical. And maybe it was. Mariah shook her head. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said. "Just live here, love this place, fill it with laughter, fix that back fence, let Annie run in the yard." She stood then, came around the table, and hugged me so tightly it felt like my ribs might break. And I welcomed the ache, because it was real, it was full, it was earned. Later that evening, after they left to begin the process of moving in, I sat on the porch swing and looked out at the street that had seen the rise and fall of every version of me. I thought about the woman who once stood at this door, in her 20s, bringing home her first baby. I thought about the wife who held her husband's hand one last time in the living room, and the mother who made lunches, packed bags, and worried over spelling tests and scraped knees. And I thought about the old woman they had whispered about. The senile ghost in her own story. She was gone, and in her place was me, fully present, fully proud. This wasn't a revenge story. It was a reclamation. I hadn't burned the house down. I had passed it on. It was 2 weeks later when the knock came. I was sitting by the window with a book I'd read a dozen times, To Kill a Mockingbird, one of Thomas's favorites. The wind stirred the curtains gently, and the sound of birds outside made the moment almost too peaceful to be real. Until I heard the car door slam, then the knock, sharp, quick, angry. I didn't even need to peek. It was Lynn and Eric. Mariah and Annie had already started moving into the house a few days prior. They were in the basement, organizing boxes and painting one of the spare bedrooms when I answered the door. Eric didn't say hello. Lynn didn't smile. "You had no right," Eric barked. "No right to just give it away." I stood silently, letting them burn through the first wave of outrage. "This house was supposed to stay in the family," Lynn added, her voice tight with restrained venom. "We were going to make sure it was kept safe, that you were kept safe." "Safe?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you call sneaking through my drawers, making retirement home plans behind my back, whispering to each other like I'd already lost my mind?" They shifted uncomfortably, but didn't deny it. "I heard you," I said. "Every word. I heard you call me senile, heard you talk about how I'd become confused, all because I didn't want to be managed like a houseplant." We're trying to help," Eric snapped. "No," I said flatly. You were trying to control me. Lynn folded her arms. And now you've just handed over our inheritance to a stranger. I took a breath, slow and deep. Then I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and let the screen creak shut with a soft click. She's not a stranger. She's a friend, a better one than either of you have been in years. And it's not your inheritance. It never was. It was mine. Eric scoffed. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearer than I ever have, I said. You've mistaken silence for decline. But I was quiet because I was listening, because I needed to be absolutely sure of who you were before I made my decision. Lynn's eyes glistened, but there was no apology in them, just bitterness. So that's it? You're just cutting us out? I'm not cutting anyone out, I said. You did that all on your own. The day you stopped seeing me as a person, the day you treated my age like a weakness instead of a lifetime of wisdom. You lost this house the moment you stopped loving me without strings attached. They were silent then, not out of guilt, but because there was nothing left to take. Eric turned to walk back to the car. Lynn stayed a moment longer. Mom, she said, and for a brief second her voice cracked, almost human again. You raised us. I did, I nodded. And I will always love the children you once were. But I can't live the rest of my life waiting for them to come back. Then I turned and walked back inside. I didn't cry, not even when I heard the car drive away. Because you don't cry over people who only showed up when something was at stake. You mourn them, you release them, and then you bless yourself with the life they tried to withhold from you. That night, Mariah brought dinner, chicken pot pie and green beans. Annie sat beside me and asked if we could plant flowers out front next week. I smiled. Not because I'd won something, but because I'd finally let go of something that had been weighing me down for far too long. A week later, the front yard was filled with the scent of turned earth and budding flowers. Annie had picked out the marigolds herself, bright orange, ones like little suns in the soil. Mariah brought petunias and daisies. I contributed some lavender from a pot I'd been tending on the windowsill since last spring. We worked together in the warm Connecticut sun, kneeling side by side in the ghee. Dirt, our hands muddied, but our hearts clear. And as I watched Annie pat down the soil with her small hands, I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I wasn't sad anymore. Not about Eric, not about Lynn, not even about the years I spent trying to earn their love again. Because love should never need to be earned, not from your children, not from anyone. It should simply be given, like water to a plant, like sunshine through a window. And Mariah and Annie, they gave it freely. Mariah had insisted on paying the property tax moving forward. She was already talking about repairs she wanted to make, not out of obligation, but respect. She told me, "This will always be your home, Helen. We're just honored to live in it." I didn't need a title to it anymore. I had already imprinted my soul into its walls, its floorboards, its creaking stairwells. Sometimes at night, I'd walk through the house barefoot, tracing memories like constellations. The corner where Thomas had danced with me after his promotion. The closet where Lynn used to hide during hide and seek. The hallway where Eric scrawled on the walls with crayon, and I'd laughed instead of yelling. I didn't cling to those memories like relics anymore. I honored them, and I added new ones. Annie's. Laughter echoing off the porch. Mariah singing off-key in the kitchen. The fresh scent of bread and basil and nail polish. I was still alive, still needed, still me. One evening, I sat with Mariah under the porch light, sipping iced tea as the crickets tuned up their nighttime song. "I don't know if I ever said it right," she said softly, "but thank you for trusting us." I looked over at her. This woman who had walked through storms of her own and still smiled like the sun. "You didn't have to say it," I said. "You lived it." She nodded. "Do you ever think they'll come around?" I paused, thought of Lynn's tight jaw, Eric's clenched fists, the disappointment they wore like perfume. "Maybe," I said, "but they'll have to find their way back on their own. This time, I won't be the one waiting at the window." I didn't say it with malice, just peace, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone walk away. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not revenge at all. It's joy. It's still blooming, still laughing, still living, despite everything they tried to strip away. I never intended to write them a letter. But one morning I woke up before the sun, the air still cool and silent, and I felt this tug, deep and persistent, like something unfinished, was reaching out from inside me. So I sat down at the same kitchen table where I had once bandaged scraped knees, written grocery lists, and prayed over unpaid bills. And I wrote, not to shame them, not to beg for understanding, but to leave them with the truth they refused to see. Dear Lynn and Eric, I know you're angry. I know you believe I made a mistake, that I let sentiment cloud my judgment, that I gave away your inheritance in a moment of confusion. But let me tell you something plainly. My mind has never been clearer. You see, I didn't donate the house because I was manipulated or because I wanted to punish you. I gave it away because I remembered who I am, and I remembered who you became. When I needed conversation, you offered control. When I needed dignity, you offered supervision. When I needed to feel human, you treated me like a liability. You forgot that I once sat beside you through sleepless nights, that I taught you to tie your shoes, packed your school lunches, stayed up past midnight sewing costumes for your school plays. I didn't do those. Things for thanks. I did them because I loved you, unconditionally. But love, my dear children, is not a guarantee of loyalty. You see, I heard your whispers. She's slipping. She's not all there. It's time to take over. And so I did what I've always done. I acted with grace, quietly, intentionally, without spectacle. I gave this house to someone who reminded me that love is not earned through guilt, but offered through presence. Mariah never asked me for anything. She just gave time, kindness, respect. She helped not because she hoped to gain something, but because it was right. You came with plans. She came with soup. You came with brochures. She came with warmth. And so, I made my choice. You may never understand it. You may tell people I lost my mind, that I was taken advantage of. Let them believe it. But if you're honest with yourselves, if you look hard enough, you'll know I didn't act out of weakness. I acted out of strength. I don't need you to agree with me. I just hope, one day, you remember the version of me who loved you without limits, and that maybe, just maybe, you'll become someone who loves that way too. Until then, Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in a box along with family photos, my wedding, ring, and an old music box that still played the lullaby I used to hum when they were babies. I left it at the lawyer's office, with instructions to deliver it if they ever contested the deed. And then I let go, because there's something deeply liberating about choosing your own ending, about standing in the autumn of your life and saying, this is who I am, this is what I gave, and this is what I won't apologize for. The next morning, Annie raced into the kitchen, holding a wrinkled drawing she'd made. It was of the house, the front porch, the garden, and 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, and one small, all holding hands. "Look, Grandma Helen," she said proudly, "it's us." I took it in my hands and smiled, feeling something gentle and whole settle into my chest. "That's perfect," I whispered. It's exactly right. And it was. Because in the end, they called me senile. But I was never confused. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I did it with love.